I know it sounds like a long shot, Captain, just because the car involved was the same as Starsky here drives.
I'm Hutch. He's Starsky.
David and Paul's relationship, friend or foe? Was he married? Wait, how many times? Was he a hit maker on The Masked Singer? And why did he stop singing? We all know Hutch busted criminals on screen, so how did his son become quite the outlaw himself? Welcome, I am your host, Detective Nostalgic Nick, with all these answers about the great David Soul, including his turbulent love life and how years of abusing his body came crashing down with devastating consequences. We spend a lot of time researching the topic, writing the script, voicing said script, and then editing all that into something we sure hope you enjoy. So, if you do, all you gotta do is hit that thumbs up icon for us. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a memory. But now, without further ado, come on and let's hit the streets. Did David Soul ever marry? David Soul was a man of many talents, but he still found time to meet his soulmate. Well, a few of them, actually. His first partner was Miriam Mim Rousseff. The two were actually high school sweethearts when Soul was 18. Mim was pregnant. At first, Soul was ready to ditch town, leave everything behind. But that's a shame that he has carried with him for years after the fact. He once said, quote, "The ignominy was terrible. I knew there was no alternative but to marry her, but I couldn't tell my parents because their strong moral code meant they would have come down on me with the wrath of God." That strict moral code was from his very particular religious upbringing. His father was an academic and a minister. Growing up, David was frequently beaten with a wooden clothes hanger, and anytime he went out to just have fun, his mom told him to remember his faith's morals. His and Mim's hasty wedding lasted just over a year before he caught her with another man, and then he turned the page of that chapter of his life. David then hit it off with an actress named Karen Carlson for far longer, and their marriage lasted some 9 years before things went south. There wasn't that pressure to do the proper thing, but David was still haunted by inner demons the whole time. Without being doctors, we can't say for sure why, but physical abuse at home probably did not help. These demons turned David into someone his family didn't want to be around, and soon enough, it was on to wife number 3, Patty Carnell Sherman, who he was married to for 6 years. But this time, David sabotaged this relationship in a pretty horrifying way. The story goes, he attacked Patty when she was 7 months pregnant. Reportedly, he even sat on her stomach and gave her a pair of black eyes. David admitted to getting violent and said he hit her only once, but added, quote, "And I know that was too many times." The next time was another actress, Julia Nixon, and she kind of knocked some sense into David, because now David had to attend therapy classes for anger management and alcoholism after attacking Patty. But his recovery wasn't over, and it was Julia who told David under no uncertain terms that he needed help with his drinking. And so, with her insistence, he entered rehab in 1989. But then just 4 years later, David and Julia split, but the impact of her advice always lived on. Then finally came wife number 5, Helen Snell, who he started courting in 2002 and finally married in 2010. David was touring Britain in the play Death Trap, and Snell was doing PR for it. At first, David was completely uninterested because in his words, he, quote, "didn't like PR," but their time together at work helped them connect. And David got to know Helen for, quote, who she really was. David found himself smitten with someone he called, quote, "the most beautiful, wonderful woman I could possibly imagine." In fact, David made a huge change just for her. He revealed, quote, "I finally got British citizenship in 2004 because I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life here with Helen." And that's exactly what he did, but he also left a very messy past in his wake for the rest of his family. How many biological children did David Soul have? So those 5 marriages resulted in 6 kids. His youngest is a daughter named China Soul, who got her music talents from dad, and today has a very successful career as a singer. This Florida native's debut album was called Secrets and Words, which features the highlight singles Cold and Breathe.
I'm not the type you can easily stifle. I'll stand here with
when she's not making music, China also dabbles in modeling and also acting. Yep, that's David's daughter, all right. The news about another kid of David's, Brendan Solberg, gets a bit more harrowing. He got into methamphetamine, and according to the Spokesman review, he made some for some Idaho drug gangs. At first, he found, quote, "You feel like a whole new person." But just months into using the drug, Brendan's life was in free fall, and he faced some serious trouble with the law. At one point in these legal woes, Brendan was working on a 12-batch contract a gang roped him into. And Brendan was actually relieved that the arrest got him out of this very dangerous deal. Well, for a little bit anyway. Brendan went on to very passionately denounce the drug and everything it represented, saying, quote, "I think that is the devil in the drug." During an interview, Brendan insisted, quote, "When I'm sober, my family is real important to me." Why did David Soul stop singing?
I'm the covered man. I'm the covered man.
Before he was a detective from Duluth, David Soul was the covered man, a musical alter ego act he did for the Merv Griffith Show in 1966 and 67. So yeah, basically he is the real inventor of The Masked Singer. His musical gigs ended up paying for acting lessons. And then, of course, his acting career blew up, and he focused on that, but he did return to his musical roots as soon as the opportunity arose.
Dreamers will chase a rainbow.
For Soul, it was not about which track raked in the most cash. It was about the art. As David explained it in that soulful way, quote, "Acting and singing and writing are all about expressing yourself, and if you have that need, it just never goes away. It is not something you grow out of." But time and poor habits took a toll on David's body, and that affected everything, even his ability to sing. His last studio album was Leave a Light On, all the way back in 1997. Though, credit where it's due, he did get some compilation albums out over the years since. David took this in stride, explaining with acceptance, quote, "My voice changed, mostly because of my health, so I can't really sing anymore, but that's okay. A lot of things change when you go through life." In fact, there might have even been some relief. Like many actors who had that one-hit show, David had a very complicated relationship with Starsky and Hutch, and that fame that it brought along that eclipsed his musical roots. But of course, it also gave him his future work and a huge spotlight. He explained, quote, "It also gave me the chance to get back into the recording studio, and Don't Give Up on Us was released and went to #1 just about all over the world."
Don't give up on us, I know we can still come through.
Some people wondered why this guy who was all about driving fast cars and flinging himself at bad guys could suddenly think he was a pop star. They didn't realize that I was a singer and musician long before I made any mark as an actor. What did David Soul suffer from? It was wifey actress Julia Nixon who told David flat out, quote, "You're destroying yourself with your drinking. You've got to do something." But that wasn't until 1989, and that was just one part of his self-destructive ways. For 50 years, David smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day. He stopped in the 2010s, but by then the damage was of course already done. Soul had a lung removed because of that cancer, and this icon of TV, who called himself a singer before an actor, ended up suffering from severe COPD, a condition involving constriction of the airwaves and difficulty or discomfort in breathing. Paul Michael Glaser knew enough about Soul's life to know the last few years of it had been very unkind, or as he described it, difficult. Through it all, David's 5th wife Helen Snell supported him as the end drew near. At one point, he even stayed in intensive care for 72 days. Doctors thought that would be it for him, and David might have thought so too. Because after being put on a ventilator and undergoing a tracheostomy, he said, quote, "I couldn't walk, I couldn't do anything, I was in delirium." That was back in 2017, and David cleared that health scare, but he never made it fully out of the woods. The end was fierce and full of support for David. According to Helen, Soul succumbed, quote, "after a valiant battle for life in the loving company of family." The world lost David Soul on January 4th, 2024. He was 80 years old. David Soul might be gone, but Hutch remains still. Are Paul Michael Glaser and David Soul friends?
Please don't cry.
Part of what made Starsky and Hutch just so addictive to watch was their contrasting backgrounds and personalities. Starsky was the streetwise tough cop, opposite Hutch's calm intellect. And this dynamic actually carried over a bit into real life, and it nearly threatened any chance these two had at connecting. In an interview about their characters and personalities, Glaser once said of Soul, quote, "He didn't want to rock the boat." That was the total opposite of his longtime co-star, Glaser. Paul said outright of himself, quote, "I was all about rocking the boat, especially when I felt like they weren't listening. So I got the reputation of being the bad boy, of being the difficult one." So basically, the higher-ups could use Glaser as the face of a problem, and Soul the face of the model citizen who went with the flow. It's no surprise Michael also said of their time working together, quote, "It wasn't all roses and it wasn't all always wonderful. We'd have our times when we'd fight and we disagree. So how do such conflicting personalities pull off some of the best on-screen chemistry for almost 100 episodes?" Well, Glaser admitted, quote, "My chemistry with David was very much about what happened in front of the camera. Off camera, we didn't have a whole lot to talk about. Well, they broke the ice through what they had in common. Both would endure some intense personal struggles, like Soul's nearly half a dozen marriages and battle with alcoholism. Paul wouldn't face a husband and father's worst nightmare until the show ended, but he was someone with a deep capacity for emotion, using the loss of his wife and daughter to push for AIDS research. These two needed time to let themselves connect emotionally, with Paul saying they just had a hard time feeling uncomfortable as two guys opening up, even though they had no problem being buddies on camera. Adding to that problem was once again David's upbringing. And he once explained that his dad, quote, "brought me up never to talk about my feelings." Well, time fixed that problem. Time and both Starsky and Hutch themselves. As the years went on, and Paul could confidently say, quote, "Then the years went by, and the last few years when you have a relationship that has existed that long, you can't help but to really care and love that person." So, when the world mourned David's passing, Paul was right there grieving for someone who just wasn't a colleague. Because in his tribute statement, Paul said, quote, "David was a brother, a friend, a caring man. We shall never see his like again." I find it difficult to comprehend David's passing. Seems only yesterday that we were sharing loving insults on the phone. It just takes time, I tell myself. In fact, the two actually stayed close. Before the end, their relationship became exactly what we all loved on screen. David Soul once shared how he still got so many questions about Starsky and Hutch decades after it ended. Of course he had the same knee-jerk worry that that was all he'd be remembered for, but he also knew he and Paul Michael Glaser did something really special together with that show. And for that, he always respected one of the best crime shows of all time. So, what's a great episode of Starsky and Hutch that you recall? Did you follow David's career during his covered man act? Did you know he was so musically gifted? Get in the comments and tell me all things David Soul. If you have another favorite role of his that's not Hutch, please give me some recommendations. Come on, slide across the hood and click that thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel for all things 60s, 70s, and 80s. But most importantly, from all of us here at Do You Remember, we want to thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.